Inclusive teaching, supporting all students in the college classroom. Introduction to multiple means of engagement.
Your students' level of motivation and engagement is shaped based on their educational backgrounds, cultures, and how relevant they find the course to their personal lives and goals. Using multiple means of engagement asks you to think about what your students find motivating or engaging, and what experiences they find support their learning and which do not. For example, some students may enjoy engaging with their peers in group work, and others might find it a struggle to talk to their peers and so may find group work stressful and difficult. Similarly, some students like spontaneity and change in their learning environment, and others thrive when offered consistency and routine. It's important to consider these differences when designing engagement strategies for your students and not to assume that your educational preferences or those of students you've taught in the past are the same for the students you have now.
It's important that faculty provide multiple ways for individuals in the class to engage with the instructor. In an online class, for instance, sometimes a faculty member might say, well, I have office hours and we'll use Skype or some other synchronous tool for office hours. It's important for faculty members to know that that tool may not be accessible to everyone in the class, and so options should be provided. And email is always a good one. Email is always accessible to students in your class. There are email packages that everyone can use, and that's usually a prerequisite for even being in your class. And so that one would be an option that you could provide. In small group discussions, sometimes technology is used as well. Good instructions for the students is really important, but also making sure that the options you are providing are accessible. The first question they have to answer when they report out is how they selected the communication method that they're using in such a way that everyone could participate in the discussions. Often what comes from that discussion are things like when they're going to meet. That seems to be the most difficult thing, either online or on-site. And that, in the case of an online community, would lead to an asynchronous tool to use, so they don't have to be in the same place at the same time. That's something that can be considered. And when you have the students then have to decide what they're going to use for communication, a student with a disability where some of those communication tools might not be accessible for them can speak up and vote for another way. They don't have to disclose their disability, but they can say, well, this is the way I would like to communicate on this particular assignment. And so, putting the responsibility on the part of the students can be a reasonable thing to do as far as engagement.
You're not teaching subjects, you're teaching students, right? And so their life matters, what they do after class matters, their motivation matters, what happens before they come to the classroom and when they leave the classroom matters. And that should drive the strategies that you use, not the other way around. So, what is interesting is even with something like active learning, which on its face appears like this really inclusive thing, could end up really being the same unidirectional, I tell you what to do type of pedagogy as lecturing, right? If it's done in a very thoughtless way. So if you have students working 35 hours a week after class, where are they going to have time to watch a 45-minute video lecture for every day of class, right? If people are having trouble to access internet or afford those kinds of devices, if 80% of the class requires that kind of engagement, are you doing a service or a disservice, right? If the materials for the class, if the courseware and the enhanced video and the textbook is costing $250 plus, and sometimes financially it takes 2.5 weeks to kick in, and somebody doesn't get materials until the third week. So they're behind 3 weeks already. So are you thinking about these things? If people are coming to the classroom hungry, right? I mean, just a basic life need. If you don't have an understanding of these things, you can go in with all of the best intentions in the world, all of the active learning strategies, and it can fall horrifically flat because you didn't take the time to understand your population, right? There are times when it is perfectly appropriate for me to spend some time in class, really unpacking a subject, actually, I guess, quote unquote, lecturing. There are times when it's appropriate for me to pull them in and, take what I think that they should know or know already and engage in problem solving. And I can just tell you from my own context, because every professor, every instructor has a different group of students. what has become apparent over the years is my role in teaching first semester freshmen is to get them confident that they can actually do science, right? I know you haven't seen a science textbook in 3 or 4 years, but in 3 months I can get you to a place where you can believe in this process. And that has less to do with 50 learning outcomes that are in a textbook and more to do with me getting into your soul and into your spirit. So yes, the class is an introductory biology class, but really, to me, it's a class about teaching you how to find meaning and purpose. And the content is sort of built within that. And I do that because I understand the context of my students. Yours may be different, right? But that difference in context is what should drive what you choose to do in that face-to-face time.
So some of the challenges instructors may encounter in their efforts to create inclusive and socially just learning environments are student resistance. Students have been socialized to participate in a particular way in the learning environment that tends to be passive as opposed to active. And so when we invite students to be active participants in the learning environment, they can find that to be unsettling and can resist in a variety of ways. In my experience, particularly with underrepresented students, sometimes there's safety and comfort in being invisible in the learning environment. And in inclusive and socially just learning environments, you are requiring students to be front and center in the learning process. And so hiding is not rewarded. And so students can struggle with that, especially when we take into consideration issues like stereotype, threat, and things like that, right? So student resistance, and then also students can resist faculty members being their pedagogical style that positions them in ways that don't affirm their traditional sense of what the teacher student relationship is supposed to be. And I've often had students who have said to me, I don't pay all of this money to listen to other students talk. I came to hear you lecture. And so that can be a challenge, particularly when you realize that there are a variety of different learning styles in the classroom, and you have to try to figure out what's the best way to reach all of the students in the process.
Participation is a really hot topic, and it's one of the things that people try to measure in some fairly traditional ways. And the most common thing is, does the student talk out loud using their voice in class? And there's some recognition that that's not the only way to participate, and sometimes participation is also being a good group member or not sleeping during class, or but really a lot of it is super subjective, right? Is the student looking like they're participating? Does the student make appropriate eye contact? Does the student nod, or does the student take notes at times when it looks like they should be taking notes? But these are not real good, accurate, empirical measures of whether students are engaged or attentive or participating. And I've gotten a lot of value from Margaret Price's book, Mad at School, which talks a lot about mental disability and how mental disabilities are represented in higher education. And in that book, she talks a lot about what it means to be present. And I've learned from thinking about presence as something that can be measured not just by having your physical body in a room, right, but that you can be telepresent, that you can think about with online engagement as forms of participation and activity. And so I'm really trying to think, what does it mean? What is my goal when I think about participation, when I think about presence? And my goal is always I want students to learn. And if they can demonstrate in multiple ways that they have taken up and thought about and responded to different elements of class, that's not contingent on them being physically present and smiling and laughing at the right jokes or taking the right notes during lecture. There's different ways that students pay attention. There's different ways that students demonstrate engagement. And I really think that there's a lot of possibilities around learning management systems, online presence, in-person active presence, and different roles that students can play in the classroom that all demonstrate active learning.